You probably think this sounds like a joke. A former president looks at a frozen island and says, "I want Greenland." But history tells us something uncomfortable. The most dangerous geopolitical shifts rarely begin with explosions. They begin when power redefines what is reasonable. Greenland is not just ice. It is position. It is access. It is leverage in a rapidly opening Arctic where Russia and China are already moving. Donald Trump says this is about national security, not minerals. He warns of foreign ships in northern waters. And behind closed doors, his advisors are discussing options that go far beyond diplomacy. If you value clear thinking over noise, stay with me and consider subscribing, because this is not about one island. It is about how alliances fracture when power stops asking for permission. To understand why Greenland suddenly matters so much, we have to step back and see the system beneath the headline. At its core, this story is not about territorial ambition in the old imperial sense. It is about how security is being redefined in a world where geography is becoming fluid again. For decades, the Arctic sat at the edge of global politics, frozen, distant, strategically quiet. That era is ending. Melting ice is opening new sea lanes. Technology is shrinking distance, and military planners are once again looking north. From Washington's perspective, Greenland sits at the center of that shift, not because of its people, not because of its economy, but because control of space, early warning systems, and Arctic access now shapes power projection in the 21st century. For Denmark, this is about sovereignty and alliance trust. For Greenlanders, it is about self-determination. And for NATO, it raises a disturbing question. What happens when the alliance's strongest member starts treating a partner's territory as a strategic asset to be acquired? To answer that, we need to understand how Greenland became strategically indispensable and why history quietly set the stage for today's confrontation. To see how we arrived here, we have to rewind past today's headlines and into the deeper logic of history. Greenland may sit on the North American continent, but for nearly 300 years it has been governed from Europe. Denmark's control began in a colonial era when distance meant isolation and power moved slowly. For much of the 20th century, Greenland remained remote, poor, and strategically quiet. That changed during World War II. When Nazi Germany occupied Denmark, the United States moved in. American forces established bases, radio stations, and supply routes, turning Greenland into a shield across the North Atlantic. After the war, the Americans never fully left. Pituffik Space Base, once known as Thule, became a cornerstone of U.S. early warning and missile defense systems. A 1,951 defense agreement gave Washington a lasting role in protecting the island. Later came autonomy. In 1979, Greenland gained home rule. Most internal policies shifted to local control, while Denmark retained defense and foreign affairs. What emerged was a quiet arrangement. Greenland governed itself. Denmark handled diplomacy, and the United States guaranteed security. That balance held until the Arctic stopped being frozen in time. The first rupture came not quietly, but shockingly fast. In early 2025, Donald Trump revived an idea many thought had died years ago. The United States should take control of Greenland. This time, it was not framed as a joke. It followed a dramatic U.S. military operation abroad, and it was accompanied by something far more unsettling: the suggestion that force was not off the table. Greenland's Prime Minister responded bluntly, "That's enough now." He called the idea of U.S. control a fantasy. But inside the White House, the language hardened. Options were discussed. Some aides publicly claimed no one would fight the United States over Greenland's future. At the same time, American officials insisted the goal was cooperation, buying, not invading, building commercial ties, facing common adversaries together. If this feels confusing, that's because it is. Power was speaking in two voices at once. If you're trying to make sense of moments like this, stay with me. This is where geopolitics reveals its true nature. because this was not just a provocation. It was a stress test of the system itself. And the system, as we're about to see, has hidden mechanisms most people never notice. Do you want me to write the next part? What most headlines miss is that this crisis is not driven by impulse. It is driven by structure. The United States does not see Greenland as a country to be persuaded. It sees it as a node in a larger security system, one that stretches from North America to Europe, and now, increasingly, into the Arctic. In this system, geography is destiny. Greenland sits beneath key flight paths. It anchors early warning radar. It guards the northern approach to the Atlantic. As ice recedes, it also overlooks new maritime corridors that rival traditional trade routes. From this perspective, sovereignty becomes secondary to function. Who controls the territory matters less than who controls what the territory enables. That is the hidden mechanism at work. When security competition intensifies, alliances quietly shift from partnerships of consent to arrangements of necessity. Denmark believes the rules still apply: law, consent, alliance, norms. Washington is signaling that the rules are being rewritten by pressure from Russia and China. These two views can coexist only for so long. And when they collide, the consequences rarely stay contained. That collision brings us to the second escalation, faster, sharper, and far more dangerous than the first. The second escalation did not come with tanks or troops. It came with diplomacy sharpened into accusation. High-level visits followed. Speeches were made on Greenlandic soil, accusing Denmark of neglect, of failing to invest enough to defend the territory. The message was unmistakable. Protection comes with conditions. Then came a symbolic move with very real consequences. A special envoy was appointed, not to manage relations, but to imagine incorporation, to speak openly about Greenland becoming part of the United States. For Copenhagen, this crossed a line. For NATO allies watching closely, it raised alarms, because when pressure replaces trust, alliances begin to hollow out from the inside. At the same time, Washington continued to stress unity. Common adversaries, shared security, commercial cooperation, two narratives running in parallel, one calming, one coercive. This is how modern crises accelerate, not through sudden war, but through the steady normalization of ideas that once seemed unthinkable. And for the people living on the island, this was no longer an abstract chess match, because when great powers reposition, it is ordinary lives that feel the ground begin to shift. That brings us to the human center of this story, where strategy collides with identity. If you live in Greenland, this debate does not sound strategic. It sounds personal. You are told your island is vital, but not because of you. You hear world powers talk about security, radar, sea lanes, and slowly you realize the conversation is happening above your head. Most Greenlanders want something simple and deeply human: dignity. Many support independence from Denmark, but almost all reject becoming part of the United States. They do not want to be purchased. They do not want to be pressured. They want to decide their own future. When leaders in Washington speak casually about control, it feels like erasure. As one local voice put it, he's treating us like a good he can buy. If you've ever felt small in a system that claims to protect you, you understand this instinctively. Power, when unchecked, stops listening. If this story resonates with you, stay with me, share it, because these moments matter. They reveal how global systems treat ordinary people when stakes rise, and what happens here does not stay here. Because the moment sovereignty is questioned in Greenland, every small nation begins to wonder what protection really means. That question carries us beyond the island and into the global shockwaves now forming. What happens in Greenland does not stay in Greenland, because the Arctic is no longer a frontier, it is a junction. For NATO, this moment is profoundly destabilizing. The alliance was built on a simple promise: collective security, mutual respect, shared rules. But that promise depends on trust, especially trust that power will restrain itself. When the United States pressures Denmark over Greenland, it sends a signal far beyond Copenhagen. Smaller allies begin to ask whether guarantees are conditional. Larger rivals begin to test the cracks. Russia sees opportunity in distraction. China sees leverage in economic presence and long-term positioning. Both benefit when NATO argues with itself, and Europe is forced into an uncomfortable reckoning. If Washington can openly challenge the sovereignty of an allied territory, what does alliance solidarity really mean in an era of great power competition? This is how global systems fray, not through one dramatic collapse, but through accumulated doubt. Greenland becomes a case study watched carefully from the Baltics to the Pacific of how power behaves when interests collide with principles. And once that question is asked, it cannot be unanswered, because the future now hinges on what comes next, and the paths ahead are starkly different. From here, the future splits not into certainties, but into scenarios. In the first, restraint prevails. The United States recalibrates. Pressure gives way to negotiation. Denmark invests more in Arctic defense. Greenland gains greater autonomy without becoming a bargaining chip. NATO absorbs the shock and quietly adapts, stronger for having confronted its limits. In the second, ambiguity becomes permanent. The rhetoric softens, but the tension remains. Special envoys stay. Strategic interest intensifies. Greenland exists in a gray zone, neither threatened openly nor fully reassured. NATO survives, but with lowered trust and a constant undercurrent of doubt. And then there is the third path, the most dangerous one. Power normalizes coercion. Sovereignty becomes conditional. Alliances hollow out as smaller states hedge their bets. Russia and China step into the spaces where trust once lived. History teaches us that systems do not fail all at once. They erode until one day what held them together is gone. Greenland may seem distant, but it is a mirror reflecting how the strongest actors behave when the rules feel inconvenient. And that brings us to the final question: what this moment demands of us as citizens, as allies, and as thinkers in an unstable age. This is why Greenland matters not as territory, but as a test of whether power still recognizes limits, of whether alliances are built on consent or merely tolerated until they become inconvenient, and of whether security in the 21st century can exist without eroding the very principles it claims to defend. Donald Trump did not invent this tension. He exposed it. The Arctic is opening, competition is intensifying, and the old assumptions that allies will always agree, that rules will always hold, are no longer safe. The question is not whether Greenland will change the world. It already has. The real question is whether democratic alliances can adapt without abandoning their core values, or whether strength will increasingly be measured by how much resistance power is willing to ignore. If you want to understand where global politics is heading next, stay with me, subscribe, share this conversation, because what we are witnessing is not a side story. It is the beginning of a new chapter, one where geography returns, power speaks louder, and the future depends on whether restraint can still compete with force.